Right, so in this video I wanted to introduce my BBC Micro. I didn't have a BBC Micro back in the 1980s, so my first computer was actually this Acorn Electron in the back there. You can probably see, obviously the Acorn Electron was released to sort of compete a bit with the ZX Spectrum market, a much cheaper sort of version, but still had some of the functionality of the BBC, so some of the games were compatible, but it had the same basic programming language. Obviously I used BBC Micros in school. I was at that generation where we had multiple BBC Micros in my secondary school, proper Econet sort of link up there, and last couple of years ago I decided I wanted to own one for myself, so I bought one. So I'll give you a bit of a tour through what I've got. Here's the machine, bought a couple of years ago. Some of the upgrades I've got for it to make it sort of, well, improve its sort of playability and a bit of hobby stuff as well. And I'll show you a few games and uses for it. So let's have a look inside first. So I'll try and adjust the camera. But I'll lift it up to the camera. So I still haven't got the best camera here. Probably do with a better camera. So I've already unscrewed it, so we can have a look inside. Yeah, what we got here, we've got power supply. I haven't opened that up or touched it. I'm fairly confident that it's been recapped, because the rest of the board has been recapped. In fact, under the keyboard there's actually a date that it was being recapped on. So I'm quite happy about that, really. But anyway, it could be a problem. Maybe at some point I need to dismantle it, just have a little check of the capacitors and things like that in there. We've got the 6502 capacitor, sorry, 6502, famous 6502 processor there. Load of RAM chips over here, 32 kilobytes of RAM. And what I'll do, I'll pause the video and I'm going to open up this, take the keyboard off and just show you the ROMs, because that's probably one of the most interesting parts of it. So anybody who knows anything about BBC Micros will know that you can actually sort of get a bit of a unique story from these machines by actually looking at the ROMs that are being installed. Just out of the way, the keyboard out of the way. Because they were so upgradable with these things, you could just put different ROMs in, you could get ROM expansions and things like that. So I'll try and have a look what ROMs we've actually got in this one. So we've got the Comstar. Not 100% sure what that one's for. I don't know if that's for the Etherlink or something. The MMC, that's a modern chip that's for one of the upgrades I've got, which is an SD adapter. I'll show you that in a second. It's got WordWise Plus, which is it's a built-in word processor that can run off it. And then the other two, I'm guessing, must be the original Acorn sort of basic things like that. So the MMC one has got sort of advanced disk tools on and things like that. So it helps an adapter sort of emulate a floppy disk drive, and I'll show you that once we get everything booted up. So obviously I'm not a massive expert at these things. There might be some extra chips in here that you can see. Something's going on over here. There's like a blue chip socket there with an NEC chip in. Maybe some people can tell me if there's any interesting modifications on this that aren't sort of standard. So I'll just show you so they're the ROMs that are installed on it, and I've got two upgrades for it. I'll put this back together in a minute. I'll tell you what, first of all I'll show you this. I've got the original user guide manual with it. One of my friends came around recently and he was quite impressed by this. It brought back a lot of nostalgia just looking at the user guide, looking at these lists of coding. He had a BBC at home when he was a kid, and go through this and learn sort of a lot of coding on the BBC. So it's a great reference guide, and I have been using that myself a bit for doing a bit of programming. Yeah, so the upgrades I've got two upgrades for it. Like I said, so that ROM chip in there enables this thing to work, and this plugs in. You can see there's an SD card slotted in the top. just a little printed circuit board. It says BBC Micro MMC interface. Obviously that matches where it says MMC on that chip in there. Then this ribbon cable plugs into the user port here. So that plugs in there. I won't plug it in yet because I want to screw all this back together and show it to you. And that enables basically it's got a load of disk images on here, and there's like a master menu, so it lists all the disk images. You can select which disk image you want, or you can just load them straight from the menu, but it's got all the sort of functionality and quite a lot of extra tools and things on there. The other upgrade I've got is this, which when I first got it I wasn't sure how much use it would be, but I have had a little bit of use out of it. So this is what we call a PiTube. The BBC Micro supports a second processor, so it's got another port here that says tube on it, and this is where originally you could plug in a second processor, and the second processor used to come in a box about the same size as the same length as the BBC Micro. It'd sit on the side, and there was a range of ones. You could get like different programming ones. You could get ones that would link up to what's it called? Not Minitel, the Prestel is it? So you could actually dial up to sort of almost like BBS sort of type services, modems, these sort of things. But this will emulate a lot of the different sort of cores and second processors. So this can be a Z80 processor. You can have a second Z80 processor. It can be a second 6502 processor. It can also be a second 6502 processor running at quite a high speed as well, something like 400 megahertz or something like that, 300 to 400 megahertz. And it just utilises a Raspberry Pi, a custom made board there. And there's a couple of uses for this, and I'll explain those once I've got it all up and running. But it's yeah, like I said, when I first got it I wasn't really sure what to use it for, but I have found a couple of uses for it, so which is quite good. I'll get it all plugged back together. I'll just show you this as well. I've got a RGB to SCART connector for it, so I can just plug it straight into I can plug it into a CRT like this one, but my go-to monitor, which I tend to use, I've attached to the wall all the time, so it's useful. It's got loads of connections on the back, really useful for plugging. Got VGA, SCART, composite, everything you could possibly need. It's HDMI, so you can plug multiple systems into there. So I'll get this all rigged up, and I'll show you what we can do with it. As always, we always have a few issues with these things when we're trying to put it back together. Not sure I quite plugged the keyboard back in properly, so when I switched it on, the keyboard was behaving strangely, so I had to disconnect everything, reconnect everything, and I've got it working now. So I think now this is the the nostalgia bit, I think, for most people when they come up to my sort of retro game space and they see the BBC Micro. One of the first things they ask about is the noise when you switch it back, when you first switch it on. Obviously it's very memorable sort of noise, and it sticks in people's heads, so let's give it a try. There we go. A slight delay on the screen picking up the signal, but you've got that distinctive sound produced by the PC speaker in there. So I've got the Turbo MMC sort of already plugged in, which is the the disk drive emulator, and we can see that's installed because obviously it comes up slightly differently, the sort of post screen here, the boot screen here. And obviously we're straight into sort of basic BBC Basic, which is what we want to be. So what I can do a couple of things here. So I can have a look at what all the discs are that are installed by typing in DCAT. It gives me a list. So we've got 252 that were actually already on the card when I got it, but I've created a couple of extra discs, so it is actually writable, readable, writable. You can create your own discs with various commands. If you type in star help, it shows you all the ROMs that are actually connected. So we've got ComStar, we've got the WordWise sort of installed, the operating system chip that's installed. We've also got this, which is the MMC, which is the disk filing system, the utilities, and the disk utils. So you can actually find out lots of information by just typing help, and that's how I've worked out how to do most things. But obviously it's got a built-in menu as well, which is great. So if I just hold shift and break, which if you remember is the classic sort of command to actually load a disk, it tries to load the disk and we get a list of all the sort of games on here. So let's just have a quick look at a couple of classics on here before we do anything else. Some ones that I sort of particularly liked. Let's go for a bit of Chucky Egg, shall we? Chucky Egg, very good version on the BBC. Some nice PC speaker sound, BBC speaker sound coming out there. Can't skip this introduction. I mean, at the time this was very high quality PCs, sort of micro sound going. So if we press S, one player. See if I can remember the controls. I don't know if it's Z and X on this one. I'll go. See what happens. What's this? That's a game. I think I used to redefine the keys. Typically on BBC and Acorn Electron games, the controls were Z and X and star and question mark up and down, rather than these opposite keys which you had on a lot of other computers at the time. But Chucky Egg somehow seems to use the same one for all its different versions, but you can redefine the keys on this. There you go, first level completed. So let's just come out of here. Now sometimes when you reboot, sometimes it goes back into just that disk, sometimes it's clever enough to go back into the sort of master disk with the menu on. Let's have a look at Repton. Oh no, let's have a look at Repton, because that's a classic BBC game. I've got all the different versions: Repton, Repton 2, Repton 3. Going to Repton. Space to play the game. Ooh, loud. You can't adjust the volume. It is possible, I think, to install a sort of adjustable resistor in it, so you can actually change the volume on it. But well, that wasn't really concentrating there. It's very much a bit like Boulder Dash, but very much more of a puzzle game. Really, you've got to collect all of the diamonds. So like, I can't go back there, so if I've missed any diamonds in that section, I can't go back to them. So this is a classic BBC game. I'll get back up there now doing that. Unlike Boulder Dash, you can't run out of the way of the boulders. In this, once you move down and the boulder's above your head, it always kills you. Let's come out of this. It's a bit very loud, the sound on this at the minute. Right, let's do have one more game. Show you one of my sort of classic games, Thrust, which is a good sort of physics type game, which I think the BBC was quite nicely handles pretty nicely for the time. So we've got shift and return, that's fire and thrust, and then we've got cats. Right, okay, so I think I can do this. That's it. Right, so you can collect fuel like this. Basically needs a thrust, and then you've got to fire. You're going to collect these balls and then shoot them back up into space. So a simple first level, and it gets more complicated because you have to sort of descend through caves. Obviously it's quite tricky controlling this thing. And these guys try and shoot at me, so I'll try and kill them before they kill me. Let's get the fuel. As you can see, I'm a master of this game. Oops. That's good timing. So I'm going to show you the PiTube now, and I won't show you the discs actually, because I've got some discs that I've created on here, and I'll show you why I'm not showing you these though straight away. I'll get the PiTube out and sort of I'll talk through its actual uses. Right, so I've got the PiTube installed now, connected to the tube port. Just a point, I got it from the Retro Clinic, and you can see that on there, but they sent it me fully set up. There wasn't any, I didn't have to really do any setting up, just there's a little micro SD card on there. They configured all that for me, sent me a list of some basic instructions as well, so definitely I'd recommend the Retro Clinic if you are wanting to get one of these. So we can see straight away that the the tube is enabled. You can see at the top that it's actually set to 6502 sort of processor, which I believe is the sort of default one. So there's two on here. If I set it to either 0, that should be a 6502 processor running at 274 megahertz, or 1 should set it to 3 megahertz, which is more of a sort of compatibility mode. And we can change the processor by typing in FX 151230 and then the number of the processor that we want to run. Let's have a look. So if we set it to, then we can run the Z80 processor, 60 megahertz Z80 processor, and then if we press Control Break, obviously we get a different sort of thing. A lot of these processors, I think the reason that I've had issues with it is because you need to have setting up the hardware to get these things working and stuff. Is, you know, it's not necessarily as simple as that. I mean, it's running as a processor, but you've got to mess about with all sorts of different configurations. So you can actually set it to 286 DOS mode as well, which was one of the reasons I bought it. But again, actually getting DOS disks and things to work on it are are quite difficult. I mean, I've looked at some guides on how to do it, and it's kind of probably beyond me. So yeah, so we've got 900. Again, it changes the amount of memory as well, depending on which processor running the 286 processor there. Again, there's not a lot you can do with that, but there are a couple of uses for it. One of the more interesting processors on here is you can run the ARM development system, and for those who probably don't know about the ARM, it's probably the most successful processor of all time. You know, mobile phones, everything really have been using these. I think is it called Advanced Risk Management? I'm trying to think what the term sort of stands for. It used to be Acorn Risk Machines, I think it used to be, and then they changed the acronym later on. But basically, this was developed by somebody at BBC on a BBC Micro. They had a development system and a second processor. So if we run the 230.12, this is basically the original ARM processor. Got 4 megabytes of RAM on there. So that was developed by Sophie somebody. I can't remember what her surname is now, but anyway, very famous processor. So that's interesting. I'm sure there's loads of exciting things to do with that, but probably a bit beyond my sort of skills. You know, I'm not particularly a programmer or anything like that. But what I can use it for, I'll show you two things. So if I disable it first, I just want to show you, because there's a version of Elite that we can run, and it does take a little bit of fiddling around to get Elite working. But I'll show you the original version of Elite first, so we can disable the PiTube just by using 14 as the processor. So if we go in there, it should be disabled. So now I can load. You can't load off the disk whilst the tube's working for some reason, so that's why it's quite tricky to get it's working. But if we go across to Elite, we can see here there's Elite, and there's an Elite tube and Master Enhanced version. So let's try the normal version of Elite first. And if we press F0, so this is again the normal Elite version. I'm trying to remember what the controls are now. And that's up and down. It's these, so you can see it looks alright. So what I should have shown you actually was the original boot screen when it first comes up, because you can see the kind of speed. It's like vector graphics, and BBC was quite good at doing vector graphics. You can see the here, so you can see this bit. So it's that's the ship. It's moving around reasonably fast. It's quite fast. Is the BBC at processing that. So if I come out of there, what I'm going to do now is use, whilst it's disabled, I'm going to try and load it. It always errors because obviously there's no tube enabled, but I can't access this menu from whilst the tube's enabled. So I load it, it crashes out, commands out. Then if I select the faster processor, lovely clicky keyboard on this BBC Micro, really solid, feels really solid. So with the 0, which is the faster. So now we basically, if I reboot it now, we've got 64K RAM, but we've also got the faster, the 6502 processor running at 274. Now I've got the disk selected, so if I do star cat, I can see Tube Elite is listed on the actual disk. So now if I do star Tube ELT, it loads the Tube enhanced version, and as you can see, it's moving much quicker. It looks really smooth, doesn't it, on the camera? It is a little bit jerky when you look at it in real life, but still it's a lot quicker. So let's just go into the game. And there. So I mean, this is quite useful if you like playing Elite. It's a bit slightly enhanced version. You might think it's worth buying for this slightly enhanced version. Obviously we're not getting any better graphics really, it's just running a bit quicker, a little bit smoother. The other use I've found for this is that when I'm programming, because like I say, I'm not a programmer, but I was doing a bit of a dabble with some programming a few months ago, and I decided so I'm programming BASIC, and for those who know BASIC, it's a translated language, which means that it runs kind of live. It sort of translates it live as it's running, sort of line by line by line by line. So if I just load up one of my programs, so I've got it on this disk, so I've set up some programs in here. So if I do load game 4, so this is my basic program that I've made, a little game I've made. So if I run it now, this is with the let me just disable the tube first. So 151 230 40 control break. So I'm going to load my game. So this is my game that I've programmed, doing a bit of practice, and basically trying to run away from this coronavirus that's trying to chase you down. Need a little bit of bug fixing, because there should be a vaccine there. So if we collect the vaccine before the virus gets us, every time we move, then we've won. Basically, that's the aim of the game. And it's slightly delayed. If you just look at how quickly it sort of draws the screen, I was trying to make the game a bit more complex than this, and as I was adding complexity to it, it was getting slower and slower. And considering it's not a massive, it's not taking up a massive amount of memory, because the program's having to translate that language as it's going along, it's really slow. So I mean, you can use like assembly language on the BBC, which is much quicker, but that's beyond my sort of abilities. So what I did was I found out that if I actually enable the tube on it, it can run things much quicker. So I suppose it gives you a bit more power there to be running, creating your own games, or you're doing your own basic programming. A lot of these sort of modern boards you can buy sort of some project boards that run BASIC, And again, it's this classic sort of line by line translated basic, because modern processors are so fast, it doesn't matter, it can still run quite complex technical games. So potentially you could make some fairly complex games on this in basic, using this sort of PiTube as an accelerator. So let's run it now, and then if I draw the screen, you can't really see this, it's enter difficulty level, so you've got 1 to 10, and all that does is just increases the speed of the coronavirus, and the distance it'll travel for every sort of cycle. As you can see, everything draws a lot quicker now with the PiTube enabled, and I could potentially make this game a lot more complicated, really. I suppose I could add a lot more enhancements to it. So yeah, so that's like I say, another potential sort of benefit of the PiTube. So there you go, that's my BBC Micro. We've been through, played a few games, we've had a look at the enhancements I've got. If you've got any other sort of suggestions or anything else you spotted inside, it'd be nice to hear about them. I'd like to do another video on my Acorn Electron at some point, and I've got a few other projects that I want to do some videos on, my Amiga and 1200 and things like that. So see you later.